My dad announced at my sister's law school graduation dinner that he was removing me from his will. Right there, in front of 40 people at the nicest restaurant in Charleston. No warning. No private conversation first. Just his voice cutting through the clinking glasses and polished silverware, steady and rehearsed, like he'd been waiting for an audience. I didn't cry. I didn't stand up. I just sat there holding my water glass and thinking about how the centerpieces were white roses, which had always been my favorite, not my sister's. Before we get into it, where are you listening from right now? Drop a comment. I read every single one. My name is Tatum. I'm 31 years old, and I grew up in a house where love was distributed like a limited resource. You had to earn it, maintain it, and never ever embarrass the people who dispensed it. My sister Paige was always better at that than me. She knew how to smile at the right people and stay quiet at the right moments. I asked too many questions. I had opinions. I wore the wrong shoes to church twice in a row, and apparently that said something about my character. The night of the graduation dinner, I drove 40 minutes to get there. I'd taken the afternoon off work, stopped at a florist, picked out a card that said something genuine instead of something generic. I wanted to be there. Despite everything, I always wanted to be there. The private room at the restaurant was full of my parents' friends, a few of Paige's law school classmates, some family acquaintances I recognized from holiday parties. My dad was at the head of the table in his gray suit, the one he wore to things he considered important. My mom sat beside him in silk, smiling the smile she reserved for public occasions. Wide, warm, slightly disconnected from her eyes. I found my seat near the far end of the table. The place card said Tatum in someone's careful handwriting. No last name, like I was a caterer who'd wandered in. Pages said, Paige Hargrove, JD. I noticed that before I sat down. Dinner moved along fine for the first hour. Toasts were made. My dad talked about Paige like she was the culmination of everything he'd ever worked toward. She laughed softly, tilted her head in the modest way she'd perfected, and let him go on. I watched her from down the table and tried to remember a time when we were close. We had been, once, when we were kids. Before the lines got drawn. I was on my second glass of wine when my dad stood up again. I assumed it was another toast. I reached for my glass. He said, I also want to take this moment while everyone who matters to us is here to share a decision your mother and I have made. After a great deal of reflection, we've decided to restructure our estate. Paige will be the sole primary beneficiary going forward. Tatum, he looked at me directly, which was somehow the worst part, will be removed from the documents. We feel this reflects the direction our family is moving in. The direction our family is moving in. Someone at the table made a small sound. A chair shifted. I heard someone whisper near the end of the room. I put my wine glass down very slowly and stared at the centerpiece. The white roses. I counted the petals on the closest bloom without moving my eyes. My dad sat back down. My mom lifted her glass and took a sip like he'd just announced a renovation project. Paige looked at the table. She didn't say a word. Nobody corrected him. Nobody asked if I was okay. The conversation eventually resumed, first awkwardly, then with that particular determination people have when they've decided something uncomfortable will be treated as if it didn't happen. I stayed for another 20 minutes. I don't know why. Some kind of muscle memory, maybe. Some residual hope that someone would pull me aside and say that was wrong. Or at least, are you okay? No one did. I said goodbye to Paige near the door. She hugged me and I could feel her wanting to say something. She opened her mouth and then closed it. She squeezed my arm instead. Safe drive, she said finally. That was the whole sentence. I drove home in the dark with the radio off, and when I got inside my apartment, I sat on the kitchen floor for a while. Not crying, just sitting. There's a kind of shock that doesn't come with tears. It comes with a very specific silence in your chest, like a room after all the furniture's been taken out. I'd always known I wasn't the favorite. That information had been delivered in 100 small ways over 31 years. The college fund that ran out the same year I switched majors. The family photos where I was cropped to the edge. The way my dad introduced us at parties, this is Paige, she's pre-law. And then, as an afterthought, and this is Tatum. I told myself it was just his personality, that he was proud of both of us, just differently. I had been, apparently, very committed to that story. I didn't go back to the floor. I got up, made tea, and opened my laptop. I want to be honest about why I opened it. It wasn't some strategic, calculated move. I was 31 years old, and my father had just cut me out of his will at a dinner party, and I needed to feel like I still had ground under me, so I started looking. I didn't even know what I was looking for. My parents had, years ago, added me to a shared family Google Drive, back when I was helping my mom organize documents after my grandfather's death, estate paperwork, old tax returns, insurance policies. I'd done most of that work. She didn't know how to use the scanner. I'd never been removed from the drive. I opened it out of habit more than intention. Most of the folders were familiar. Old scanned documents, insurance binders. But there was one I didn't recognize, labeled simply, Property. Updated. I clicked it. There were 7 files inside, transfer documents, notarized, dated within the last 14 months. I found my name on the 3rd one. The property in question was a beach cottage in Pawleys Island, South Carolina. My grandfather had left it to me and Paige jointly when he died 6 years ago. I had a copy of that will. I'd helped file the probate paperwork myself. I knew exactly what the original document said. The signature on the transfer form did not match mine. I pulled up a bank form I'd signed 2 years earlier, held both up to the screen. The loops were wrong. The T in my first name, I always write it with a slight leftward pull at the base. This one was upright, clean, like someone had practiced it, but not quite gotten the weight of the pen right. My cousin had notarized it, the same cousin who worked as a paralegal at my father's attorney's office. I set my laptop on the counter and walked to the window and stood there for a long time looking at the parking lot below, the orange glow of the streetlights, a cat crossing the asphalt. This wasn't just favoritism. This wasn't just being cut out of a dinner toast or cropped from a holiday card. They had forged my signature. They had transferred the only tangible asset my grandfather had left me, the place where I spent summers as a kid, where he taught me to fish off the back porch. They had signed my name and handed it to my sister without telling me. I called my Aunt Fern at 11:30 at night. I know it was late. She picked up on the second ring. Tatum, honey. Her voice was careful in a way that already told me something. I asked if she knew about the Pawleys Island property transfer. The pause that followed lasted long enough that I set down my mug. Your daddy said it was being consolidated, she said finally. For estate planning purposes, he said you'd agreed to it. I had not agreed to it. Fern. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Did you actually believe that? She exhaled. A long, tired sound. I didn't ask the right questions. I should have. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't want to get in the middle of... She stopped. You know how your father gets when someone pushes back. I did know. I'd spent 30 years learning not to push back. We talked for another hour. By the time I hung up, the apartment was cold and the tea was long gone. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything I remembered. Dates, document names, the name of my cousin, the name of the notary stamp, the name of the LLC I'd seen in the transfer records, Heron Cove Holdings. I'd looked it up before I called Fern. The registered agent was a business attorney in Columbia, the same one my dad used. I wasn't shaking. That surprised me. I felt very, very calm. I texted my friend Odette around midnight. She'd known my family for years, worked in commercial real estate, understood property law in a way I didn't. I sent her the documents. Her response came back in 12 minutes. This is fraud, Tate. You need to call a real estate attorney tomorrow morning. Not tomorrow afternoon. Morning. I kept thinking about the cottage. The way my grandfather kept a rusted coffee can full of fishing lures on the back shelf of the garage. The way the porch boards creaked in a specific sequence that I still knew by heart. Left side, middle, skip the far right. I had been planning to take my own kids there someday, if I had kids. I had held on to that thought like a small, warm stone in my pocket. They took that. They took the stone and they signed my name to the paperwork. I didn't sleep. I made more tea, spread out every document I could find on the kitchen table, and worked until the sun came up over the rooftops across the street. My attorney's name was Jeffrey. He was 62, wore bow ties, and did not waste words. When I walked into his office at 9 the next morning and laid out the documents, he put on his reading glasses and went through them without speaking for 11 minutes. I counted. He looked up. "Do you have the original will?" he asked. I had brought a certified copy. "Do you have any prior signed documents we can use for handwriting comparison?" I had brought 3. "Good," he said. "We're going to file a petition to invalidate this transfer. We're also going to report the notarization to the state licensing board." "This is your cousin?" "It was." He nodded once. "And I want you to understand that this will become a matter of public record." I told him I understood. I had also, in the weeks before that meeting, been doing something else. Something quiet and patient and, in retrospect, something I should have started years earlier. The beach cottage wasn't the only thing I'd found in that Google Drive folder. There were investment account documents that named Paige as the sole beneficiary of accounts my grandfather had originally left to both of us. There were trust documents that had been quietly amended. There were email threads, forwarded, apparently by accident, into the shared folder, where my dad's attorney referenced the transfer of the Paige-only accounts and noted that the second daughter's interests had been addressed informally, which was, as best I could tell, a legal euphemism for nothing had been done for me at all. I had printed everything. I had organized it into a burgundy folder with labeled tabs, the kind my mom used to give me for school when she was in a generous mood. There was one more thing. About a year earlier, I had been helping my parents prepare for a fundraiser event. I'd driven down to their house and spent an afternoon in the dining room sorting donor correspondence. At one point, my mom had made a call in the next room. She didn't know I could hear her through the pocket door. It had always been thin. And I heard her say, "We can't put Tatum's name on the materials. She doesn't photograph with the image we're building. We're positioning Paige for the foundation board, and it needs to look cohesive." I had stood there holding a stack of envelopes and let that sentence settle through me. I hadn't done anything with it then. I'd set down the envelopes and gone to the kitchen to refill my water glass and not thought about it again, or tried not to. But I had, later that night, recorded a voice memo on my phone. Just a note to myself. What she'd said, the date, the context. I don't know why I did it. Some part of me knew, I think. Some part of me had been collecting evidence for a situation I wasn't ready to name yet. I sent that voice memo to Jeffrey on a Thursday. He called me back within the hour. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "My own phone," I said. "I recorded it." "South Carolina is a one-party consent state," he said. "This is admissible." The court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in October. The courthouse was ordinary, fluorescent lighting, the smell of old carpet, a water fountain in the hallway that dripped. I wore a gray blazer over a navy dress, and Jeffrey's bow tie that day was dark green, which I chose to take as a good omen. My parents sat across from us with their attorney, a man named Whitmore, who looked like he charged by the syllable. My dad had his hands folded on the table. My mom sat beside him perfectly still, her expression the exact neutral she deployed when she was most focused on maintaining control. Paige sat behind them in the gallery. She had come. I hadn't known she would. When I walked in and saw her there, I didn't know what to do with my face, so I just looked forward. Jeffrey was methodical. He walked through the exhibits one by one. The original will, the transfer documents, the handwriting comparison, which had been reviewed by a certified forensic document examiner hired through the firm, the notary's prior disciplinary record with the state bar, the investment account amendments, the email thread referencing my interests being addressed informally, and then the voice memo. My mother's voice came through the laptop speakers clearly. "She doesn't photograph with the image we're building." The room was very still. My dad's attorney objected to the characterization of the recording as relevant. The judge, a woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, overruled him in about 4 seconds. My mother turned to look at me. It wasn't the look I'd been bracing for. The cold, controlled stare she used when I'd embarrassed her. It was something else, something closer to recognition. Like she'd known this moment was waiting somewhere and had simply hoped it would wait longer. I didn't look away. The judge ruled. The transfer of the Pawleys Island property was declared invalid due to evidence of signature fraud. The cottage would revert to joint ownership as originally specified in my grandfather's will. The investment accounts would be audited. The notarization was referred to the state licensing board for review, and a copy of the full record would be forwarded to the South Carolina Attorney General's office for review of potential elder financial abuse statutes, given that some of the transfers had occurred during my grandfather's final illness. That last part I hadn't expected. My dad stood up from the table very quickly and his chair scraped loud against the floor. He didn't say anything. He walked out. My mom sat for a moment longer. Her attorney leaned in and said something to her in a low voice. She nodded once, slowly, like someone receiving information from very far away. Then she stood, straightened her jacket, and walked out without looking at me. Jeffrey put his hand on the table. Not quite a handshake, more like an acknowledgement. "You did well," he said quietly. Paige was still in the gallery when I turned around. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, looking at the floor. When she felt me looking, she looked up. "I didn't know about the signature," she said. Her voice was low. "I want you to know about the signature," she said. Her voice was low. "I want you to know that. They told me it was being handled through the estate attorney. I didn't ask questions I should have asked. I believed her. That was the complicated thing. I believed her. And it didn't make it much better, but it didn't make it worse either." "I know," I said. We stood there for a second, in the emptying courtroom. "I don't know what to do with any of this," she said. "Neither do I said. "But I'm not pretending it didn't happen anymore." She nodded. That was the last real conversation we had for a while. 8 months later, I'm sitting on the back porch of the Pawleys Island cottage writing this. The boards creak in the same sequence. Left, middle, skip the far right. The coffee can of fishing lures is still in the garage. I haven't touched it. I'm not ready to decide what to do with it yet. I didn't sell the property. I thought about it. I had nights where I wanted to sell it and never drive past the exit for Pawleys Island again. But it was my grandfather's. He left it to me on purpose. I'm going to honor that even if it takes me a while to feel comfortable being here. My parents haven't reached out. The foundation restructured its board and issued a vague press statement about refocusing their philanthropic priorities. I read it once. I didn't read it again. Last month, Paige called me. She wanted to meet for coffee. We sat across from each other at a place in downtown Charleston that neither of us had any history with, which felt right. We didn't fix anything in 2 hours. That's not really how it works. But she said she was sorry, and she meant it, and I could tell she'd spent time with that apology before she brought it to me. It wasn't the quick version people give when they want the discomfort to be over. It was the harder kind. I told her I wasn't ready to act like everything was normal. She said she understood. I told her I didn't want to lose her either. She held her coffee cup with both hands and didn't say anything for a minute. Then, "I've been thinking about what it cost you. All of it. And I've been thinking about what it cost you. All of it. And I've been thinking about how I kept not seeing it because it was easier. I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't know where we go from there. Somewhere, probably. Not back to where we were. That place was built on a version of the story that wasn't true. But somewhere new, maybe. I'm not closing that door. The hardest part of all of this wasn't the courtroom. It wasn't even the dinner. It was the years before that. The 1,000 small moments where I adjusted myself to fit into a space that kept shrinking, where I made excuses for behavior I should have named, where I told myself that needing to belong to them was the same as them actually wanting me there. It wasn't the same thing. I know that now. You can want someone to choose you more than almost anything and still come to understand that waiting for them to do it is not a plan. It's just a way of not moving. I moved. It cost a lot. And it wasn't clean, and some days I still sit with the weight of it in my chest. But I'm sitting on my grandfather's porch right now, And the sun is doing that thing it does over the inlet in the late afternoon, going all orange and flat across the water, and nobody's voice is in my ear telling me I don't fit the image. I fit just fine. If you've ever had to choose yourself when no one else was going to, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this kind of story stays with you, subscribe. There's more coming. There's something nobody tells you about finally standing up for yourself after years of shrinking. They make it sound like a moment. One clean, decisive second where everything shifts and you feel powerful. That's not how it was for me. For me, it was 11:30 at night on a kitchen floor, a cold mug of tea, and a Google Drive folder I only opened because I had nowhere else to put my hands. I think about that a lot. How the truth was sitting in a shared folder the whole time. How they forgot to remove my access because, in their version of events, I wasn't important enough to think about carefully. That oversight, that small, careless thing, was the thread that unraveled everything. Not because I went looking for a fight, because I needed to feel like I still had ground under me and I started with what I knew. That's what I mean when I talk about intelligence as something you live, not something you perform. My dad had attorneys. He had a paralegal cousin and a business LLC and years of carefully maintained appearances. I had a certified copy of my grandfather's will, 3 signed documents for handwriting comparison, and a voice memo I'd made on a random Tuesday afternoon because something in me had quietly said, "Remember this. Intelligence isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like keeping records. Sometimes it looks like not throwing away the paperwork even when you want to pretend the situation doesn't exist." And here's what I've come to understand about the way my family operated. The favoritism, the erasure, the way my name kept getting trimmed from the edges of things. None of that happened because I was lacking. It happened because I was inconvenient, because I asked questions, because I didn't perform the version of a daughter that made their story look cleaner. That's not a failure of character. That's actually evidence of it. The people in that room who looked away when my dad made his announcement, the ones who resumed conversation like nothing had happened, they weren't comfortable with what they witnessed. They were just more afraid of discomfort than they were committed to honesty. I used to want to be more like them. I spent a long time believing that their ease meant they knew something I didn't. They didn't. They were just more practiced at looking away, what Paige said to me over coffee. I've been thinking about what it cost you and how I kept not seeing it because it was easier. That sentence meant more to me than the court ruling, honestly. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was true. It was the first true thing anyone in my family had said to me in a very long time. And I think the reason she was able to say it is that she'd finally stopped protecting herself from the discomfort of seeing clearly. That takes something. It takes a kind of courage that's quieter than people expect. The courage to revise your own story when the evidence demands it. I'm not the same person who drove 40 minutes to that dinner with a florist card and a wish that this time would be different. I don't think I could go back to being her even if I wanted to. What replaced her isn't harder or colder. It's just more honest. I know what I'm willing to accept now. I know that belonging has to be mutual or it isn't belonging at all. It's just occupying space in someone else's narrative and calling it family. The cottage still creaks in the same places. I'm still figuring out what I want to do with my grandfather's things. Some of it I'll keep. Some of it I'll let go when I'm ready. That's how most things work, I found. Not in one decisive moment, but in a series of small, honest choices, made one at a time. Until you look up and realize you're standing somewhere solid.